You're at minus 30 degrees, your fingers stopped working 20 minutes ago. And the only thing standing between you and a body bag is a metal tube on wheels held to the ground by 4 red straps. This is not a camping trip gone wrong. This is what happens when someone builds a Quonset on wheels without knowing what they're actually doing. I've watched dozens of these builds, online, in person, and I can tell you right now, most of them are one bad night away from catastrophe. Not because the builders were stupid, not because the concept doesn't work, but because everyone who builds these makes the same critical mistakes, in the same order, for the same reasons. And those reasons always start with a photograph. You've seen it. The arched steel shell in a snow-covered forest. Pink sky at dusk. Smoke curling from the chimney pipe. Snowmobiles parked outside. It looks like freedom. It looks like capability. It looks like the kind of thing a man builds with his hands and lives in like a king while the rest of the world sits in traffic. That image is not lying to you, but it is hiding something. The Quonset hut was born in World War II. The U.S. Navy needed a shelter they could ship anywhere in the world, assembled with soldiers who had zero construction experience, and set up in under a day. So they designed a half-cylinder of corrugated steel. Cheap, fast, scalable. They built over 170,000 of them. They were never designed for minus 30 degrees. They were never designed to be permanent. And they were absolutely never designed to sit on a trailer chassis in the Arctic wilderness, with a man's life depending on them. But here we are, because the idea is genuinely brilliant. If you understand what you're actually dealing with, a mobile, off-grid shelter that you can tow anywhere, set up anywhere, and live in anywhere, when it's built correctly, it is one of the most impressive structures a man can put together with his own hands. The problem is the gap between building it and building it correctly. That gap is enormous. And today I'm going to walk you through every single inch of it. Let's start with the thing nobody wants to talk about, because it's a mistake that makes the whole build look fine right up until it kills you. Steel conducts heat. Not a little. Not in a way you can work around with a bit of spray foam and a prayer. Steel is one of the most efficient thermal conductors of any building material on Earth. And a corrugated Quonset arch is essentially a radiator, designed, without anyone intending it, to pull every joule of warmth from inside your shelter and dump it directly into the frozen air outside. Every single rib you can see on that arch is a thermal bridge. That's the engineering term. A thermal bridge is a path of high conductivity material that runs continuously from the warm interior to the cold exterior, bypassing whatever insulation you've installed. And in a corrugated steel arch, those bridges are built in. They are the structure. Here's what this means in practice. Most first-time builders look at the curved interior walls and think, I'll just attach insulation to the inside surface. Spray foam, rigid board, bats, whatever fits the curve, and it will work, sort of, for a while, in modern conditions. At minus 30, here's what actually happens. The insulation slows the heat loss through the flat surfaces between the ribs, but the ribs themselves, the corrugations, continue conducting cold directly inward. And where cold metal meets warm, humid air from your breath, you're cooking your body, you get condensation. And where condensation meets minus 30 exterior temperatures, you get ice. Growing from the inside, on your walls, on your ceiling, on your gear, on your sleeping bag while you sleep. You wake up at 3 in the morning and there is frost inside your shelter. At that point, your insulation is wet. Wet insulation loses most of its thermal value. You're now in a feedback loop where the shelter gets colder, more condensation forms, more ice builds up, more insulation value is destroyed. And you're in the middle of a pine forest at minus 30 with no backup plan. The correct method, and this is non-negotiable in extreme cold, is a fully decoupled interior wall system. You build a frame inside the arch, not attached to the steel, an independent structure. Then you insulate that frame from the outside, add a vapor barrier, add rigid foam on the warm side, and finish the interior. What you end up with is a box inside a tube. The box is your living space. The tube is your weather shell. There's an air gap between them. Cold air can circulate in that gap, and it does. But it never reaches your insulation, and the steel never touches your interior wall system. It takes 3 times longer to build. It costs significantly more. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost nobody does it right on their first attempt, because it looks like overkill when you're building in a warm workshop. It only looks like the bare minimum when you're staring at ice on your walls at -30. Now let's talk about what's underneath the shelter. Because the chassis failure that ends these builds, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you warning. You go to sleep with everything solid, and you wake up and your shelter has shifted. Look at those wheels in the image. Big, cast iron, industrial. They look like they could hold a locomotive. Here's what happens to rubber at sustained -30. Most trailer tires, even heavy-duty ones, are rated for a minimum operating temperature. Below that temperature, the rubber compound becomes brittle. It loses elasticity. Under sustained static load, not moving, just sitting there, it microcracks. It deforms. After 2 weeks of -30, a tire that looked perfectly healthy when you arrived can fail structurally, partially, slowly, enough that one side of your trailer drops 3 inches while you sleep. 3 inches doesn't sound dramatic, but when one corner of a structure that weighs several hundred kilograms drops 3 inches, stress concentrates in the frame joints. And that brings us to the second layer of the chassis problem. Steel contracts in the cold. This is basic physics. But the scale of it surprises people. At -30, a steel beam that was 8 meters long at room temperature has measurably shrunk. And that contraction is not uniform across your build. Different thicknesses of steel contract at different rates. Different grades of steel contract at different rates. The bolted connections that were tight when you assembled everything in a workshop at 15 degrees above zero are now loose. Not visibly loose. Not dramatically loose. But loose enough that every flex point in the chassis is working, moving, cycling through micro movements every time the temperature changes. Every one of those flex points is a fatigue point. There is a concept in metallurgy called the ductile to brittle transition temperature. Below this temperature, steel stops deforming under stress and starts fracturing. Common mild steel, the kind used in most trailer chassis construction, has a transition temperature that sits uncomfortably close to -30 degrees, depending on the specific alloy and any existing stress concentrations in the material. Most people who build these rigs have no idea what the transition temperature of their chassis steel is. They find out the hard way. Before this shelter goes anywhere near its operational environment, every joint needs to be inspected cold. Not warm, cold. The entire chassis needs to be cold-soaked, left outside in the coldest conditions you can arrange, and then inspected under load. You're looking for movement, for flex, for any joint that shifts even slightly. Because a joint that shifts slightly at -20 will shift dramatically at -35 with wind load on the arch. Now we go up to the pipe. That chimney pipe is the detail that makes the whole thing look right. Smoke comes out, shelter stays warm. That's the logic. And at 0 degrees, with moderate use, that logic holds. At -30, something different is happening inside that pipe. When hot combustion gases travel up a flue and meet the extreme cold of the exterior air around an uninsulated pipe, the temperature differential causes rapid condensation. Water vapor from combustion drops out of the gas stream and coats the inside of the pipe. Creosote, a byproduct of incomplete combustion, mixes with that condensate, and in extreme cold, before it can drain, it freezes. Layer by layer, burn by burn, you are building an ice plug inside your own chimney. On night 1, the draft is perfect. Night 2, it's a little slow to draw. Night 3, you notice the stove is working harder. Night 4, and this is the one that matters. Night 4, you light the stove and the smoke has nowhere to go. Carbon monoxide is colorless, odorless. It doesn't wake you up. It doesn't give you a headache as a warning at low concentrations. It just makes you feel slightly tired, slightly confused. And you are in a sealed, well-insulated shelter in a location where nobody knows exactly where you are, and the temperature outside is -30. The fix is not complicated. A double-wall insulated flue pipe, or better, triple wall, maintains a high enough temperature inside the pipe to prevent condensate from freezing. It is a standard for any installation in extreme cold. It costs more than single-wall pipe. It takes more time to install correctly through a curved roof. And it is not an upgrade. In extreme cold, it is the minimum viable standard for not dying in your sleep. Go through any popular build thread right now, any YouTube series on Quonset builds. You'll find single wall pipe installed through a corrugated panel with a basic cap on top. And the comment section will be full of men saying it works great, because it does work great until the night it doesn't. And that night doesn't look like a dramatic emergency. It looks like going to sleep. Now the door. And this one matters because it seems so obviously fine. Look at that door. Steel frame, flat panel, industrial hinges. It looks like the door on a serious building. It looks heavy. It looks sealed. Steel doors are manufactured to tolerances that assume a certain temperature range. The door and its frame are designed to fit together at approximately the same temperature at which they were installed. When you drop to sustain extreme cold, the door and the frame contract, and they contract at different rates depending on their thickness, their mass, and how much thermal mass is behind each component. Within 2 or 3 freeze-thaw cycles, the door no longer fits its frame the way it did when you installed it. The gap that opens up is not large. We're talking about 2 or 3 millimeters in extreme cases. But 2 millimeters of gap around a door at -30 with any wind is a continuous cold air infiltration path. Your heating system is now in a competition it mathematically cannot win. It is producing heat. The gap is destroying it, continuously, all night, but that's the secondary problem. The primary problem is the hardware. Standard door hinges, latch mechanisms, and handles are not rated for sustained extreme cold. At -30, metal-on-metal contact in a hinge with insufficient cold-rated lubrication can seize. The latch mechanism, spring-loaded, precision fit, combined. The handle can literally shatter if impacted. Now, picture this. It is the middle of the night. There's a problem inside the shelter. Stove malfunction. CO alarm going off. Anything that requires you to exit quickly. And the door that you need to open right now requires 2 hands, significant force, and full manual dexterity. At -30, after sleeping, you do not have full manual dexterity. The correct approach is a door system built specifically for extreme cold. Thermal break in the door construction, meaning the interior and exterior faces of the door are not in direct metal-to-metal contact. Sealing compounds rated for -40 or below on all 4 edges. Hinges greased with cold-rated lubricant. Latch hardware that is oversized, simple, and operable with mitts on. A secondary emergency exit that is not the main door. None of this is exotic. All of it is available. Almost nobody installs it on the first build, because when you're assembling in the warmth of a workshop, every door feels like it seals fine. Every hinge swings smoothly. Every latch clicks perfectly. You have to force yourself to think about what -30 does to metal you're holding at 15 above. And now we come to the thing that's sitting in plain sight in every photograph of every one of these builds, and that almost nobody addresses seriously until it's 3 in the morning and the shelter is moving. The anchoring for red ratchet straps. That is what is holding this shelter to the ground in the image. 4 straps, stakes driven into snow. Snow is not a foundation. Let's be absolutely clear about this. Snow under sustained cold pressure changes density. It settles. It shifts. A stake driven into snow at dusk with enough force that you were satisfied it was solid will have moved by midnight. Not because you did it wrong, but because snow is a dynamic material that responds continuously to temperature fluctuations, vibration, and load. Now add wind. The arch shape of a Quonset is its greatest structural strength and its most dangerous aerodynamic liability simultaneously. Under vertical loading. Snow weight. The arch distributes force beautifully. It is geometrically efficient. Architects have been using arch structures for thousands of years for exactly this reason. Under lateral loading, wind, the arch shape acts like a sail. The curved surface catches wind. The wind exerts force on the anchor points. And the anchor points are 4 ratchet straps in snow. At sustained wind speeds that are completely normal at -30 degrees in open terrain, the forces on a structure this size can reach hundreds of kilograms of lateral pressure against 4 straps in snow. In the middle of the night, people have lost these shelters completely. Not damaged, not shifted, gone. In the night, In conditions where retrieving gear scattered across a frozen open landscape is not an inconvenience, it is a survival situation. You're now outside, in the dark, at -30, trying to recover equipment you need to stay alive, because the thing you build it into is rolling through the tree line. Proper anchoring in extreme cold environments is not complicated, but it requires thought that most builders do not apply at the build stage. Ground anchors, helix anchors, driven below the frost line, rated for the anticipated lateral load, not estimated, calculated. Tie down points on the chassis that are welded, not bolted. A bolt can pull from a bracket under cyclical load. A weld cannot. A secondary anchoring system, independent of the primary, that operates even if the primary fails completely. And an inspection protocol, meaning you check the anchor tension every single morning of occupation, because what was tight when you arrive will not be tight after 3 days of temperature cycling. Here is what all 5 of these mistakes share. They all look fine. In the photograph, in the workshop, in the moment of installation. Every single one of these failures looks like a working solution. The insulation looks like it's covering the walls. The pipe looks like it's drawing. The door looks like it seals. The chassis looks solid. The straps look tight. And then the temperature drops to the number on the thumbnail. And everything that looked fine starts to reveal what it actually is. The Quonset on wheels is a legitimate concept. When it is built with full understanding of what extreme cold does to steel, to rubber, to hardware, to flue pipes, to door tolerances, to anchoring points, it is a remarkable machine. The arch gives you structural integrity that a rectangular box cannot match. The mobility gives you deployment options that a fixed structure cannot offer. The simplicity of the steel shell gives you a weather enclosure that is genuinely tough. But tough is not the same as correct. And the gap between a Quonset on wheels that looks ready for -30 and one that actually is ready for -30 is enormous. It is measured in the details, in the air gap behind the interior wall, in the grade of the flue pipe, in the rating of the door hardware, in the depth of the anchor, in the torque spec of the weld. Details are not glamorous. Detail shots don't get the same view count as the wide shot of the shelter in a frozen forest at golden hour. But details are the reason some of these builds are still standing, and some of them are a story someone tells in a comment section about what went wrong last February. If you are building one of these right now, half building your driveway, or planning one for next winter, go back to the beginning, not the beginning of your build, the beginning of the design. Start with the worst night you can imagine, not the average night, not the typical night, the worst night, -35, wind, middle of the night, alone, no cell signal. Now ask, for every single system in your build, what does this do on that night? Not in the workshop, not on a calm day. On that night, the thermal bridge, what does it do at -35? The chassis joint, what does it do after 2 weeks of temperature cycling? The flue pipe, what does it do on night 4 continuous burning? The door seal, what does it do after 3 freeze-thaw cycles? The anchor, what does it do at 2 a.m. with 40 km/h wind on the arch? If you can answer every one of those questions with confidence, not hope, confidence, your build is ready. If there's a single question you cannot answer, that is where you work next. The wilderness does not grade on a curve. It does not give credit for effort. It does not care that your build looks spectacular in the summer. It only cares about one thing. What happens when the thermometer hits the bottom and you need everything to work? Build it right. Every system, every detail, every connection. Or don't bring it out there at all. Let me know in the comments if you found this helpful, and subscribe for more videos about how to survive cold winters.